Hello and welcome back to Dumpsite, a podcast about movies. My name is Felix and I'm your host. We only have 4 minutes and 20 seconds, so let's get started. Today we are talking about Hard 8, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. The film is starring Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, Samuel L. Jackson, and a single scene with Phillip Seymour Hoffman. R.I.P. Hard 8 follows Sydney, played by Philip Baker Hall, an old-time professional gambler that runs into John, played by John C. Reilly, who just lost everything gambling in Vegas. Sydney offers a helping hand, and after hearing John's down on his luck story, and 2 years later, John is still working closely with Sydney. But after meeting a new friend, Jimmy, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and falling in love with a cocktail waitress and sex worker named Clementine, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, Sydney must bail out John once again. First and foremost, to get the elephant out of the room, technically this film takes place in Reno, but 1, this is my podcast, I can do whatever I want. 2, they technically go to Vegas, and 3, there's gambling, sex workers, guns. What else do you really need? Anyway, Hard 8 is somewhat of a slow burn, much like all the other PTA films in my opinion. I haven't seen all of his films, but for the most part, PTA likes to rely heavily on dialogue and character-driven stories. And if you aren't interested in the first 15 minutes of his films, then the films just probably aren't for you. It is his directorial debut, which was based off a short film he did in '93 called Cigarettes and Coffee. It does truly feel like an indie film with sophistication and confidence in terms of the execution and flow and shots. On to my favorite parts about the film specifically, Samuel L. Jackson has to probably be one of my favorite actors in general, and in this film he just crushes it as well as he does with every role. In the 90s, he really was just the cool bad guy, and I always love when I see him play this character because you really never know if he's going to get fucked up or not at the end, and well, you're going to have to watch this one to find out if he does. But who really stood out to me was Philip Baker Hall. There is something about a lone wolf type of person who is always calm and kind of has to figure out things in their head. Now, to be honest, the only other film I actually remember seeing Philip Baker Hall in is Fired Up, where he plays a coach that says shit about 100 times throughout the film. It was actually nice to see him shine in a super different role. Lastly, I do have to mention the scene with Phillip Seymour Hoffman at the craps table. He has a special place in my heart. I remember the first time seeing him was Mission Impossible 3 when I was around probably 11 years old. I remember his character was one of my favorites at that time. And when he passed, I really got sad because his characters are always those one-offs that he is the only one that can play. He's basically doing improv the entire time, according to PTA, just berating Sydney at the craps table when Sydney finally places a 2K bet on Hard 8. For those of you who don't gamble or just live under a rock, a Hard 8 is a bet on a craps table for when you roll an 8 with a 4 on each dice versus, 5-3 or 6-2, which gets you a 9-1 on your bet. I know I've mainly talked about the characters rather than the story here, but to be honest, the story is just slow and follows essentially what I said in the log line. As I mentioned, this is common in PTA films, and his characters are really what I love about his stuff in general. Moving on to the important things, my rating, 3.5. Honestly, probably a 3, but with it being a debut and me just being biased and loving PTA, I'm going to raise it half a star. Average rating, 3.6. My favorite Letterboxd review comes from Casey, who gave it 4 stars. I just learned that PTA was 24 when he made this and almost gave it 1 star out of spite. Is this film stoner friendly? Now, this film is stoner friendly, but I do want to mention, going forward, instead of mentioning if a film is stoner friendly because I'm going to say yes every single time, what I'm actually going to start doing is letting you know when to light up that joint or when to load that bowl. Sometimes the movie's slow for 20 minutes and doesn't pick up until then. I'm going to save you that time and that flour, and whenever I feel like it's best to light up, I will let you know. Thank you for listening. Join us next Monday at 4:20 where we cover Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Terry Gilman and Cut. We're literally smoking and talking about movies.